Liberal Viewer presents.
So, welcome to Liberal Viewer Sunday live clip roundup, Father's Day edition. Thanks for joining me. Happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there. I picked out 35 of the weekend's best clips for what should be an informative show for you tonight, I think. As usual, my clips come mostly from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the Big Five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States. I'll also have some political comedy from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher last Friday night, even if this week's news doesn't seem particularly humorous. You can see all the topics I'm covering listed down in the video description, and if you're watching this as a recorded show, you should see time indexes down there to skip to the other topics or whatever topics most interest you. But of course, tonight's biggest topic, taking up about 3/4 of the clips, will be this terrible shooting at the Mother Emanuel AME Church in Charleston last Wednesday night. Though after those 25 clips, I'll have a couple clips of Bernie Sanders on the Democratic side of the 2016 presidential race, then about 6 clips on the Republican side of the race, and another clip on the perennial issue of ISIS in Iraq and Syria, and then a final clip at the end from Bill Maher following up on last week's discussion of political correctness and comedy. But first, I'll start with the major topic, and as I said, it didn't seem like there could be much humor coming out of this terrible shooting that killed 9 people in Charleston, South Carolina. But some of the reaction on the right, and of course on Fox News and from Republicans, that was kind of laughable, and that was one thing that Bill Maher made fun of in his monologue last Friday over in this clip.
And on Fox News, they could not decide if this was absolutely not the right time to talk about guns or absolutely not the right time to talk about racism. And yet, you know, the shooter purposefully went to a black church. He told the victims that he had to do it because they were taking over. He wore pro-apartheid stickers on his jacket. His friends said he was big into segregation. He talked about starting a race war. So naturally, when it comes to what motivated him, Republicans are stumped. They are. They cannot figure it out.
So yeah, that was one of the disappointments of the week, was the way some on the right wing reacted to what happened. And if you've been watching my channel, I put up a video on Thursday morning, just a couple hours after Fox and Friends tried to spin the whole incident as a anti-Christian attack instead of a racist attack, which is what it turned out to be. And even at the time, there was already some evidence, as I showed in the video. It's called Fox News Spins Racist Church Shooting as Anti-Christian, and there's a link down to that in the video description if you want to watch that sometime now, later. But I also want to show one more clip from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher, where the Republican he had on the panel, or one of the Republicans, he also had Coulter on, but one of the Republicans, Matt Lewis, still tried to claim it was an anti-Christian attack, and I thought that he got kind of slapped down by Luis Gutierrez and Joy Reid, and he even tried to say I'm not going to blame Bill Maher for being anti-Christian if a church gets attacked, and well, whatever. You can see how that goes over in this clip.
He said, he didn't go to a bowling alley.
Oh.
He didn't go to a rock concert.
He went to a storied black church, probably the most famous black church in South Carolina, if not in the country, the birthplace of the African Methodist in this country.
But wait.
And said, I'm here to kill black people.
And he sat and worshipped with Christian, African-American Christians at an AME church for an hour, and then he killed them. I think it's safe to say religion had something to do with it.
Seriously?
Well, you're not the only one to say that. Let me just quote a few people. That guy E.W. Jackson that they have on Fox News all the time, the black preacher, he said there does seem to be rising hostility against Christians in this country because of our biblical views. And then Steve Doocy agreed with him. He said, I love this quote, extraordinarily, they called it a hate crime. And some look at it as, well, because it was a white guy in a black church. Some would look at it that way. But But you made a great point earlier about the hostility towards Christians. Yes, it was about the war on Christmas. I don't know why we're bringing race into this.
There's a group called the Family Research Council in Washington, D.C., a very conservative, socially conservative group. Somebody showed up there and tried to shoot up that place.
But the young white supremacist walked in there. He stated it because he believed that they were black people were taking over his country. Now, it sounds to
I
me
agree that
like,
race was the primary motivating force.
It sounds to me just like what the Tea Party said when Barack Obama became president of the United States. There was this fear that somebody took away their country. But moreover, he said, because you're raping my women. Now, when you think Donald Trump and that young man had one thing in common this way, Donald Trump said that Mexicans come to this country not to work, but to rape women, and he repeated it. There is a correlation between what you say and what people do.
Well,
we're going to get to that.
I would not accuse Bill Maher of having any culpability.
Oh, please.
If someone goes into a church and shoots that up.
Matt,
because I never...
Non sequitur. The bottom line is, if you look even at the three flags that this young man adhered to, the Confederate flag emblem on his car, the Rhodesian flag and the South African flag from apartheid South Africa, all three of those purported to be Christian governments. The white Christian government in South Africa, which ruled over the majority black population there. In Rhodesia, the violent white government that ruled over that population considered themselves quite Christian. He could have been completely embracing what those governments stood for.
Well,
this was not about Christianity.
That's a distortion.
It was about race and hate.
It's also
So, yeah, I think that Matt Lewis guy, the right-wing guy on the panel, definitely got slapped down by both Representative Luis Gutierrez, Democrat from Texas, and then Joy Reid, who used to have a show on MSNBC. Now she's like a roving correspondent, or I can't remember her actual MSNBC title now. Having shown those quasi-political comedy clips from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher on the subject, I want to get more to the substance and show some of the reporting. First, I actually want to show how Fox News reported it. I'm going to show a couple clips from Fox News because I think Fox News Sunday, maybe they felt a little bit ashamed about the way Fox News had covered this, like I showed in my video on Thursday, or the way Bill Maher was quoting in that last clip there. And I thought that they tried to be much more sensitive than they usually are on Fox News on Fox News Sunday this morning. First, I'll show you how Chris Wallace, how they had their reporter Rich Edson definitely talk about the racism and the racism of the alleged killer in this case. And anyway, I'll discuss that a little more if you see that general report about what happened in Charleston here.
Chris, worshipers are gathering here at Emmanuel AME Church, as they do every Sunday, for regular services, though this only 4 days after a gunman opens fire, killing 9 at Emmanuel AME Church. Since then, hundreds, if not thousands, of those from around the city and those from around the country, men, women, black, white, have been here to pay their respects, leaving flowers, cards, and prayers.
We're united as one. There is no divide right now. We like to say that there is divide when there is conflict. But right now, our differences are placed aside, and we're united. We're one.
I couldn't be anywhere else on a Sunday morning, but right here to let these guys know their grace in such a horrific time has showed the world and everybody that, hate will not win.
And now the focus is on the accused killer, Dylan Roof. The FBI and Charleston Police Department say they're looking into a website called The Last Rhodesian. Rhodesia is a nod to a government in the south of Africa that was a racist regime, fell in 1979. But on that website, there were pictures posted showing Dylan Roof, photos of him burning an American flag, posing with a Confederate flag, and a number of poses with him and a gun. It also includes these racist statements, concluding with him saying, "No one's acting, and he has to." Chris.
And I'll get more to the alleged shooter's racist website, or alleged racist website, in a little bit. I actually I read his manifesto and downloaded his photos and looked through them. You got a good sort of sampling of what was in the photos there, and later on I'll have more clips describing what's in the manifesto. But first I want to show the clip that really, I think, exemplifies the way Fox News tried to be more sensitive. Here you can show their panel. They have two black women on their panel today, and one person who's actually a Democrat. They have a Democrat on their panel, Representative Donna Edwards, and then a conservative black woman. Then they have this centrist Democrat. He's not, I mean, he's almost an independent, Evan Bayh from Indiana. And then, you know, of course, Karl Rove. You can't expect much out of him. I'm not going to show any Karl Rove clips, but you'll see how Chris Wallace introduces the panel, and then he gives like a softball question to the person most on the left, which, if you watch Fox News Sunday as often as I do, usually the person on the left gets to try to clean up whatever everybody else said at the end, even if they even try. But here you can see how respectful Fox News was to the issue. Maybe, like I said, they were ashamed over in this clip.
We want to discuss this week's terrible events with our Sunday panel. GOP strategist Karl Rove, Maryland Congresswoman Donna Edwards, Deneen Borelli, chief political correspondent for the Conservative Review, and former Democratic Senator Evan Bayh. There are so many aspects to this tragedy: the long, painful history of attacks on black churches, the racist manifesto and those chilling pictures, the issue of gun control. Congresswoman Edwards, let me start with you. What are your thoughts about the massacre in Charleston?
Well, it did take me back. I remember as a little girl when the 16th Street Baptist Church was bombed in Birmingham, and I remember being afraid of going to church.
And we should say 1963, and 4 little girls were killed in that bombing.
That's right, and I think that for so many of us, the pain and the history of violence that's happened in our churches, it was a reminder again that we still have a lot of work to do in this country. And, you know, to see those lives lost, you know, a state senator and a pastor, a librarian, a coach, people who were part of the fabric of a community. And I think all of us have work to do on race. And I don't think it's inappropriate for us to talk about what we need to do to get and keep guns out of the hands of people who would commit such a tragedy.
So, like I said, a little bit more respectful and more leaning to the left side there on Fox News Sunday, although I think Fox News Sunday had the least amount of coverage. They spent a lot of time talking to this Cardinal about what the Pope said about climate change, although in a way that was sort of a reversal from what you mostly hear on Fox News. And then they covered some other issues. Like I said, I think they had the least coverage, even though they put significant amount of time in their panel at the beginning there on it. Now I want to move on and show you how CBS covered what is going on in Charleston. And this is their reporter Jeff Pegas, and he talks about what's going on in Charleston and also has some more about what we're learning about the alleged shooter over in this clip.
Well, John, the FBI is taking steps to verify the authenticity of Dylan Roof's purported manifesto. It was found on a website that also contained photographs of the accused killer. Here is Dylan Roof burning an American flag with the Confederate flag and pointing a gun at a camera. The website also contains a 2,400-word manifesto which says he was not raised in a racist home, but the event that truly awakened him was the Trayvon Martin case. It prompted him to search for information online. He found some of it on extremist websites and concluded it was obvious that Zimmerman was in the right, and I have never been the same since that day. The manifesto details hatred toward blacks, Hispanics, and Jews. The author says, "I have no choice. We have no skinheads, no real KKK, no one doing anything but talking on the internet. Well, someone has to have the bravery to take it to the real world, and I guess that has to be me."
All units responding, 110 Calhoun State.
Active shooter, multiple people down.
On Wednesday night, investigators believe Roof went to the Bible study meeting, first sat with parishioners, and then stood up, pulled out a handgun, and fired as many as 24 shots. John, the peace and security of the church was shattered on Wednesday night with the shooting. Congregants today hope to reclaim that feeling.
Jeff Pegas in Charleston.
Oh, I guess I mispronounced the name. Jeff Pegues is how you pronounce the name of that reporter who gave. And now I'm going to show you Steve Osunsami over on ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos, reporting on basically the same events. He actually shows an interview with this African-American friend of the alleged shooter, talking about how he thought he was going to shoot up a college, and then also they talk about the families of the victims forgiving the shooter, or the alleged shooter, and I'll talk about that more if you see that clip here.
To you, Martha. Police are telling us that this accused gunman is cooperating with their investigation, but I want to show you the photo that's on the front page of the local paper here. 9 sweetgrass roses remembering the 9 people who were killed outside this church. Over the past few days, we've seen hundreds, perhaps thousands of people come to this church laying candles and flowers, all with one message, that Charleston and this country is better than this.
In the words of one of the victims' families struggling with the murders here, hate won't win. The faithful are holding their Sunday services just 3 days after their church was a crime scene. The alleged gunman, who police say meant to kill black people, is seen in photos posted on a website updated just an hour before the killings. Federal and state authorities are trying to determine if 21-year-old Dylan Roof wrote this manifesto, saying that the Trayvon Martin case made him angry, that African Americans are the biggest problem that America faces, and that South Carolina has no skinheads, no real KKK. Well, someone has to have the bravery to take it to the real world, and I guess that has to be me. Chris Scriven says he never thought Roof was racist, but admits he may have missed a sign when he says Roof joked about shooting up a Charleston college.
I don't even think the church was his primary target, because he told us he was going for the school. But I think he couldn't get into that school because of the security and all that.
Despite the blood that was spilled here, the families are forgiving. On a baseball diamond, Chris Singleton, who lost his mother, Sharonda.
Love is always stronger than hate. So if we just love the way my mom would, then the hate won't be anywhere close to what love is.
In the courtroom in front of the accused shooter.
Hate won't win.
We have no room for hate, so we have to forgive.
And in the high heat outside the church.
We're all one. Our hearts, our blood's all the same. Our hearts are all the same. The color's gone in the kingdom of God.
And now a very difficult part for these families. The first of these funerals for the pastor of this church is now scheduled for the end of the week.
So that gave a few other facts that weren't in the previous reports that I showed. And one fact I didn't see reported on any of the Sunday morning news shows, but I read in Slate magazine referencing an LA Times article, is that this alleged shooter actually after he told one woman that he was going to let her live to tell the story of what happened, he put the gun to his own head and tried to shoot himself, but just got a click and the gun didn't work, and that's when he left. But he apparently actually planned to kill himself, or tried to kill himself at the end of the shooting before he did his escape. So that's one fact I hadn't seen reported. I do want to show another clip from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. Martha Raddatz both interviewed the mayor, Joseph Riley, mayor of Charleston, who I guess has been the mayor since 1975 and has been heavily involved in the civil rights movement. And in that interview, and then talking to a historian a little bit later, talks about the racial history of Charleston, and also reminds people about the African American who was shot in the back running away by a police officer last November, and Walter Scott. I covered that several weeks ago, or months ago, I guess, on my Sunday clip roundup, and that was awful when the video of that came out. And you'll see a little of that video in this clip that gives sort of the racial context of what's going on in Charleston. Martha Raddatz, ABC This Morning here.
And all the help that they're going to get.
An assurance from Mayor Riley is an assurance from all of Charleston.
In office since 1975, he is the face of this city, and in his powerful message at Friday's vigil, he spoke of unity for everyone.
But if that young man thought he was going to divide this community or divide this country with his racial hatred, we are here today and all across America resoundingly saying he miserably failed.
Tell me what it was like addressing your city, addressing those people who are so hurt.
What I saw was something very heartwarming. It was a mixed race audience, black and white singing and, praying together.
Yet racial tensions have been high in this city. Just 2 months ago, video showing White Officer Michael Slager shooting unarmed African-American Walter Scott in the back sparked protests.
No justice! No peace!
One man who tried to calm that anger, also one of Wednesday's shooting victims, Reverend Clementa Pinckney, the state representative and beloved leader of Mother Emanuel Church.
Our hearts go out to the Scott family. Our hearts go out to the Flagler family, because the Lord teaches us to love all, and we pray that over time that justice be done.
Justice has not always had a place in Charleston. We met historian John Hale at one of the city's docks, where slave ships brought millions in chains.
The history of Charleston is built upon the backs of slaves and the slave trade.
And South Carolina was the first state of the Confederacy, a place where segregation ran deep.
What does that history do to this city?
Well, this history frames how we understand race. So while a lot of progress has been made, there's still institutional remnants in our systems of education, the economy.
Why do you think the killer chose Charleston and chose that church?
It embodies a history of resistance.
Over the years.
So, yeah, there is a lot of racial history in Charleston. One fact I heard in another report that I don't think I took in any of my clips was that 40% of the slaves imported into the United States came through Charleston. I don't know if that's true, but I heard that on one of the shows this morning. And I want to show one more clip from the mayor of Charleston, Joseph Riley. He was not only in that piece by Martha Raddatz, but he also talked to Jake Tapper over on CNN's State of the Union. That one of the reasons I was actually delayed today is because CNN's State of the Union went on for like 3 hours, and I felt the need to watch all of it to make sure a large part of it was actually the service at the Mother Emanuel AME Church, and I'm even going to show a clip near the end of this topic from the Reverend Goff, who gave the sermon this morning at the reopened church. But here I want to show a clip where Jake Tapper interviewed the mayor of Charleston, Joseph Riley, and I didn't know he had been mayor since 1975, but I guess he was involved in the civil rights movement back in the 60s, and he got this nickname from President LBJ Lyndon Baines Johnson that was not supposed to be flattering, but he embraced it. They called him Little Black Joe, even though he's a white guy, and you can see that clip over here.
Great help to the families.
You've been an advocate for the African American community for a long time. Some people used to call you behind your back Little Black Joe. Lyndon Johnson.
They did, LBJ.
He didn't mean it as a compliment, but you took it as one.
Well, I took it as a compliment. That was a long time ago, and what I knew was I had to exert leadership that would be tough, because things had to change, and they have changed, and people's attitudes have changed, and the community has grown together in a most beautiful and remarkable way. But that's part of leadership. What you do is you understand the truth, where people's hearts would really like to go when they get there, and then you take unpopular positions shooting for that goal, which is the truth, an achievement. So that's what it was, and it was a bumpy time back then, but I knew we were headed in the right direction, and we got there.
I thought that not only was I kind of fascinated by his description of how to be a leader in terms of finding what the truth is and what your moral goal is, and then taking possibly unpopular positions if they help lead people towards that moral truth. In this case, equality and civil rights. And I also had never heard this whole little black Joe thing. I had seen several clips of the mayor of Charleston over the week, and that was the first I'd heard of that, and that kind of backs up the thing. I recently watched the movie Selma when it came on DVD from Netflix, and that movie showed LBJ to be not always a friend of the civil rights movement, and I guess that's another little factoid that supports the theory of LBJ as not entirely on board with the civil rights movement, and not that that's necessarily the best evidence, but I wanted to play that clip for you. And then the next several clips I want to show are on the subject of whether this attack was actually terrorism. I showed the Fox News clips, or I talked about the Fox News problem, even saying this was racist at the beginning, and then I guess the next step is to frame it in terms of terrorism, at least for several of the people I'm going to show in the next few clips, because if it were a Muslim shooting up a white Christian church, I'm sure Fox News would have been screaming terrorism, and that would have been in the text on the screen. And I didn't see a lot of that, although a lot of the people on the Sunday shows, Jake Tapper, I'm not going to show the several clips where he talked about it being terrorism, but here's over on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. Guest host Martha Raddatz had on Jelani Cobb from the New Yorker magazine, who wrote an article about this and talked about how the words we use are important. And first you can see him talking about it, and then Martha Raddatz pulls a quote from his New Yorker article and gets him to expound on it over in this clip.
We've talked about this in a lot of ways. We've said that it was, a horrible incident, and, we've kind of euphemized it, and even as horrible as it is, we can say a tragedy. But this is an act of terrorism, and we, just as we had this kind of debate we saw in 2012, Mitt Romney was going back and forth, about whether or not the president called what happened in Benghazi terrorism, or he tried to, evade what that actually was. This is something that qualifies, and we go through the Patriot Act and see, how it describes acts of terrorism, and everything about that comports to what we saw here. And I think that we have to be upfront and honest and call it that.
You also write, the fact that Dylann Roof appears to have acted without accomplices will inevitably be taken as solace. He will be dismissed as a deranged loner, connected to nothing broader. This is untrue. Even if he acted by himself, he was not alone.
Right. There is a tradition of this. And so we look at, the history of this country, and we understand that there's a great deal of terrorism that, has taken place since the foundation of it, and that African Americans have been on the receiving end of that terror. And so he is part of a lineage and part of a tradition that's deeply rooted in American history. And so we can't, even if he acted alone, he's standing on the shoulders of the people who committed atrocities before him.
Now I'm going to show a couple more clips on this question of whether this attack was terrorism, but I want to show a quick follow-up clip on whether he acted alone. Gwen Ifill over on CBS's Face the Nation was one of their panelists, and I'm going to show a couple pundit clips. I normally don't show pundits because I don't want to be commenting on commentators, but there were a lot of pundits who, and a few of whom said some things that were kind of profound, and Gwen Ifill pointed out something I've heard several people talk about in terms of those pictures that were on this Last Rhodesian website that's been attributed to the alleged shooter at the Charleston church. One of the things about those photos that seemed pretty clear to me when I looked at them is they're not standard selfies. I mean, it's possible they're on a tripod. He used a tripod with a timer, although if you look through all the pictures, some of them definitely, the framing and stuff, it definitely looks like somebody else took the pictures, and that's something Gwen Ifill noted over in this clip.
Yesterday was these were not selfies. Someone took those pictures. He's 21 years old. He didn't get radicalized yesterday. Somewhere in his life this happened. So it's not just one lone wacko. It's not just random violence. There is something underlying it which we have to speak to.
John, you know, as you think about,
and you know, that's definitely true, and there's something underlying it. But getting back to the issue of whether it's terrorism, next I want to show John Dickerson, also from CBS's Face the Nation, had an interview with the Republican head of the House Intelligence Committee, and they mostly talked about ISIS and what's going on in Yemen, and I am going to show one clip on that issue near the end of the show. But here's John Dickerson getting a Republican to admit that this is terrorism, and at least in the generic sense, although you notice if you listen to the words he uses, he never actually says it's terrorism. He says it, you know, it could be called terrorism, although the first question he answers is legally whether it's terrorism over in this clip.
Is it terrorism?
Well, it could be domestic terrorism. When you look at, clearly it was a hate crime in from my book, and clearly racism. You have to leave it up to the prosecutors for the legal definition of how this guy will be charged. At a minimum, he's going to serve life in prison and possibly receive the death penalty.
But leaving aside the legal, just as a regular person looking at this, what should
I think you easily call it domestic terrorism. I mean, if somebody, just from a layman's point of view, I don't know about it from a legal point of view.
Absolutely.
Well, at least that Republican was quick to say it was a hate crime and racism, unlike that stupid Fox and Friends segment that I put in the video I uploaded on Thursday. And then he did kind of say it was domestic terrorism, although not definitively. One of the Republicans running for president, though, Rick Santorum, was over on, I think this is ABC's This Week. Yeah, with George Stephanopoulos, guest hosted by Martha Raddatz. Martha Raddatz asked Rick Santorum if it was terrorism, and something that rarely happened, which is that Rick Santorum gave an entire answer, even with the follow-up, with which I can't really disagree. He said it's definitely terrorism, and then talked about whether it would meet the legal definition, and said maybe it shouldn't really be prosecuted that way, but anyway, here's that clip.
You called the shooting a crime of hate, said it was racially motivated. Should it be considered an act of terrorism?
I don't think there's any question when someone comes into a church for the reasons of racism and hate that they're trying to terrorize people. I mean, I don't think there's any question this is an act of terrorism, and it's as purely evil as we've seen in this country in a long, long time.
So you would like to see those federal charges brought against him?
Well, federal charges, state charges, there's certainly plenty of charges here. Whether they're federal or state charges really doesn't matter. This young man is going to get justice served on him.
You heard
So that's pretty much correct, which is more than you usually get from Rick Santorum running for president on the Republican side for 2016. But having shown that quick clip earlier of Gwen Ifill, the PBS news person and often moderator of presidential debates, I want to switch over to her cousin, who is a lawyer for the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, also talking about this being terrorism, and especially talking about how there's this basis of hatred. Let me make sure. Yeah, Cheryl and Ifill, and talking about how the Department of Homeland Security under the Obama administration put out this report a while back warning about the danger from right-wing extremists in the United States, and got a lot of backlash from Republicans, specifically from current Speaker of the House John Boehner, and I'll talk about that a little more. If you see, this is John Dickerson and, like I said, NAACP Legal Defense Fund lawyer Cheryl Ifill in this clip.
Well, you know, in 2009, you may remember that the then Homeland Security Secretary Janet Napolitano issued a report. And in that report, she suggested that we were in the danger of people like this she suggested then that right-wing extremist groups and white supremacist groups were ramping up, and they were in threat of radicalizing and operationalizing people like the people that were just described. And she was denounced for that report, as you may recall. As a matter of fact, at the time, then Minority Leader, now Majority Leader, John Boehner, specifically denounced her for using the term terrorist to describe what he said are American citizens who disagree with the direction that Washington Democrats are taking the nation. This was a report that she issued after the massacre in the Sikh temple, in which 6 people were killed, after 3 police officers were killed in Pittsburgh, in both cases by right-wing extremists and white supremacists. She was ringing the alarm bell that there is a problem. And it was politicized. It was put right into the well of partisan politics. So for African Americans who are well aware of this threat and who recognize that it exists and who have lived with this threat for many, many decades, there is a feeling of vulnerability, of not being taken seriously. The part that is supposed to bring us all together as a nation, Republicans and Democrats, black and white, is the safety of our nation. That's first and foremost. If you call yourself a patriot, if you say you love this country, then first and foremost you care about the safety of its citizens. And what we have seen too often is the safety of African American citizens sacrificed for the purpose of partisan gain, sacrificed because people are afraid to say the truth, allowing themselves to traffic in the tools of white supremacy like the Confederate flag. This has to stop. So we're at a moment where, yes, there are these people that have been described who are out there, and we can't find every single one of them, but we have a law enforcement apparatus in this country that's reported to be one of the best in the world. And we have had the alarm bell rung, and we have to see a different stance of our law enforcement apparatus towards ferreting out and using their power to find these kinds of individuals and to stop this radicalization.
Mary Ellen.
So I thought that was an important answer, an important description of some of the right-wing extremists that exist in the United States and don't get the same coverage as these, ISIS sympathizers that the FBI talks into joining some plot using a confidential informant, which are most of the terrorist plots that are uncovered in the United States seem to be like these disaffected Islamic youth who are talked into it by confidential informants. Or I've seen that in several cases. There was this Lodi case that I made a video about a long time ago, but I don't want to go into all that. I want to get back to this Charleston shooting and a slightly clueless question from NBC's Meet the Press host Chuck Todd, who I generally think is doing a good job, but here he asks Representative Jim Clyburn from South Carolina if he's surprised that in the 21st century this kind of thing is still possible. And given what you just saw in some of those last answers about there being real right-wing extremists in the United States, no one should really be surprised. And Representative Clyburn was not surprised, as he explains answering Chuck Todd over in this clip.
Congressman, you're from a generation that was in the middle of the civil rights movement. You saw the pain and the protests of the 60s, some of these attacks that took place in the 60s. Did you think this was at all possible, that something like this could happen in the 21st century?
Unfortunately, Chuck, I did. I have been saying for some time now, my friends in the Congressional Black Caucus will tell you, I've been saying to them that there's a rightward drift in the country that I think is going too far. And people get emboldened by all of this. We hear all this discussion about the Confederate battle flag. And what is so interesting about that, Chuck, is that that is not the Confederate flag. That's a battle flag that flies in front of the State House. That is a flag of rebellion. We would not be having this discussion if that were the Confederate flag or the flag of the Confederate States of America, because that flag is now a symbol of hate. So when you see the resurrection of this, a young man, 21 years old, wearing all of these apartheid things on his shirt, burning the United States flag, and glorifying the elongated version of the battle flag, certainly you're creating a climate that will allow this kind of thing to happen.
You know.
And I'm going to have several clips on the Confederate battle flag and whether that should be an important issue to respond to what happened in just a minute. First, I want to show a couple other clips from, before I showed the clip of this Senator Tim Scott talking about the Confederate battle flag, I'm going to show a couple other clips from him. He's the Republican African-American senator from South Carolina. He was actually first appointed and then was elected in the last election cycle, 2012, or no, 2014. I think he had his actual election after being appointed. And first I want to show him saying definitely that this guy was motivated by racism, which most of the Republicans seem comfortable saying after some missteps at the beginning, though he still says he's demented over talking to John Dickerson on CBS's Face the Nation this morning here.
Why do you think this happened?
Well, before we jump into the why, I want to really at least acknowledge the 9 victims that lost their lives, one of whom was a friend of mine, Clemente Pinckney, the pastor and state senator, who was just a jewel of a person, a prince of a man, and a God-fearing guy that believed in building bridges. When we look for the reasons why this happened, it's hard to understand when evil is just overtaking a heart. The mind is just demented. This was obviously a case of racism. His actions were driven by hatred, and that is the clear and dominant reason this happened.
So that's nice of him to say that it's racism that was what motivated this. Like I said, that's more than they were willing to say on Fox and Friends the morning after this attack, even though there was a lot of evidence for it. Though one thing that they really excoriated the president on Fox News was the way he came out for looking at guns again, because of course this was a weapon used for a mass killing, and I think I heard that it was the 14th time President Obama has had to respond to some mass shooting during his presidency. Here you can see Tim Scott giving the standard, Senator Tim Scott giving the standard Republican response that, you know, gun laws won't solve these problems over in this clip.
That debate, and I'm going to honor that commitment.
Another element of that debate, quickly, the president said in the wake of this shooting, it's not enough to just show sympathy, and he wants to make it harder to get guns. What's your opinion about that?
Well, listen, the first thing that you should do in the aftermath of an amazing atrocity is to look for solutions to prevent it from happening again. What I do know is that the gun laws that were broken did not stop this monster, this killer, from carrying out his acts. What I do know is that the gun laws that prevented him from bringing a gun into the church did not work. So looking for the right legislative solution to make sure that it doesn't happen again, I think when there's that much evil in the heart, it is hard to think of the right legislative solution for that problem.
All right, Senator Scott, we thank you very much for being with us this morning.
That's the end of the interview with Senator Tim Scott, but I'm actually going to show the answer he gave right before that, which was about the Confederate battle flag that's flying near the state capitol, or in front of the state capitol, not over the state capitol, which apparently was the compromise they came up with 15 years ago, that they take it from flying over the state capitol to in front of the state capitol, although some people thought it was going to end up behind the state capitol from one of the descriptions I saw. But even though some Republicans in the state legislature in South Carolina have come out in favor of getting rid of the Confederate battle flag, none of the national or Republicans at the federal level that were on the shows this morning were willing to do that. And some presidential candidate, well, Mitt Romney came out against it, and Jeb Bush said that they got rid of it in Florida. But here's Senator Tim Scott, African-American Republican senator from South Carolina, would not necessarily come out against the Confederate battle flag flying over his state in this clip.
Station Senator, some people are talking about the Confederate flag. What does that flag symbolize to you?
Well, there's no doubt that South Carolina has a rich and provocative history, and that flag is a part of the history, and for some, that flag represents that history, and for so many others, it represents a pain and an oppression. I am looking forward to our state leaders getting together and having a robust conversation after the funerals about what's the next step. If you look back in our history just 15 years ago, you saw the compromise that was reached by both sides that thought that that was a permanent compromise. And now we've heard indications that there will be an ongoing conversation, a real debate and discussion about next steps. So that will be coming soon, and after the funerals, we look forward to participating in it.
Senator Mitt Romney has said the flag should be taken down. Russell Moore of the Southern Baptist Convention said this, and I'm quoting from him, "That sort of symbolism is out of step with the justice of Jesus Christ. The cross and the Confederate flag cannot coexist without one setting the other on fire." So what is your personal stance in that conversation you say needs to take place about the flag?
Certainly powerful words from some strong leaders from around the country and here at home, and I am going to make sure that I'm a part of that conversation. My voice will be clear, my position will be stated. I'm not going to make any breaking news here. I have made the commitment to waiting till after the funeral to start that debate, and I'm going to honor that commitment.
Another element.
Well, I guess waiting till after the funeral isn't too unreasonable, but there are other Republicans who dodged it. But before I get to the Republicans who dodged it, I want to show a clip from Eugene Robinson, a journalist over. Let me make sure I'm getting the right clip next. Yeah, talking about the actual history of the Confederate battle flag. That's why I'm calling it the Confederate battle flag rather than the Confederate flag, because they're two separate things, and Eugene Robinson explained that over on Meet the Press, and then Chuck Todd actually showed the two different flags. And one of the important dates to remember is 1961, as you'll see here.
Just to what Congressman Clyburn said just now, just very quickly on the flag issue. Do you know when that flag was first flown at the State House in Columbia?
That's right. This is very important. 1961. Not
1961.
Not 1861.
Exactly.
1961, and why?
Well, it was essentially, forgive the metaphor, but it was a middle finger directed at the federal government. It was flown there as a symbol of massive resistance to racial desegregation. Period. It was all this nonsense about honoring the valor of Southern manhood, 150 years ago. They didn't have any urge to do that for a century after the Civil War. It was only after Brown v. Board, after Little Rock, after desegregation began, that South Carolinians and put up the flag on the State House, that other states in the South adopted the battle flag as part of their state flags. So it was massive resistance.
Let me put up the two flags, because you heard Congressman Clyburn talk about that one is not actually the Confederate flag. Here it is. The actual flag of the Confederacy, the first one, is the one on the left with the circle stars. What is known as the Confederate flag today is actually the battle flag of the Northern Virginia Army that was led by Robert E. Lee, that was sort of adopted as the symbol, as you say, Gene, in the 60s.
So that's interesting background. I didn't know that, and this Confederate battle flag issue has come up several times, going back to like the 2000 election. There's the story from a clip I'm not going to show about how John McCain came out against the Confederate, or would not come out against the Confederate battle flag in the 2000 election because he was afraid he would lose in South Carolina. But then after the election said that he never really liked the Confederate battle flag, and he felt bad that in the primaries he hadn't come out against it. Now I want to show two national Republicans dodge the question of the Confederate battle flag, which is especially embarrassing after you hear that history I just showed from Eugene Robinson and Chuck Todd. First, here's Rick Santorum over on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. dodging the question of the battle flag, talking to Martha Raddatz here.
Flag. You saw Mitt Romney's tweet, I'm sure, bring down the flag. Jeb Bush has said bring down that flag. Should they bring down that flag?
I take the position that the federal government really has no role in determining what the states are going to do.
You're a candidate for president. Do you not have a position on this at all?
I'm not a South Carolinian, and I think this is a decision.
It's beyond South Carolina.
I would say that these are decisions that should be made by people. You know, I don't think the federal government or federal candidates should be making decisions on everything and opining on everything. This is a decision that needs to be made here in South Carolina. I have, like everybody else, I have my opinion, but I think the opinion of people here in South Carolina and having them work through this difficulty is much more important than politicizing it.
But what is your opinion?
Well, again, it's my opinion is that we should let the people of South Carolina go through the process of making this decision.
Okay, and just.
So that's kind of bogus where he said he has his opinion, and then when Martha Raddatz followed up and said, well, what is your opinion? And the answer is, well, my opinion is the people of the state should decide, not me. And at least over on CBS's Face the Nation, I do have that right, don't I? Mike Huckabee, was he on Face the Nation? Yeah, no, I'm sorry. It's NBC's Meet the Press. When Chuck Todd followed up several times with Mike Huckabee, former governor of Arkansas, now running for president, and even showed him talking about it last time he ran for president, he eventually got Mike Huckabee to admit that personally he doesn't fly the Confederate battle flag over in this clip.
And a couple of Charleston things in South Carolina and get your reaction. The flag debate is something you were a part of back in 2008. I want to play what you said when you last ran for president, when the issue came up during the South Carolina primary.
You don't like people from outside the state coming down and telling you what to do with your flag. In fact, if somebody came to Arkansas and told us what to do with our flag, we'd tell them where to put the pole. That's what we do.
Governor, how do you feel this morning?
I still feel like it's not an issue for a person running for president. Here's what I think the question underlying all of this is. We're asking, is South Carolina a racist state because of the flag that flies on their Capitol grounds? Here's what I can tell you as a frequent visitor to South Carolina. This is a state that largely white people elected a female governor of Indian descent and the first ever African-American United States senator from the South. They have more diversity in the people that they have elected to statewide office than New York, Connecticut, or Massachusetts. There's 4.8 million people in South Carolina. I don't think you could say that the presence of one lunatic racist who everybody in this country feels contempt for and no one is defending is somehow evidence of the people of South Carolina. I think we've seen the people of South Carolina and their character by what you saw in Charleston with people of all races, Democrats, Republicans, from every perspective, hugging, praying. Nobody was burning down their community. They weren't breaking windows. They weren't beating up on cops. They were exhibiting a true Christian spirit that really is, I think, exemplary to the rest of the country.
I guess the question is, should government be sanctioning a symbol that a large chunk of residents believe is a symbol of racism?
Well, it depends on which level of government. If the state government of South Carolina wishes to address an issue in their state, that's fine. But Chuck, if you can point me to an article and section of the Constitution in which a United States president ought to weigh in on what states use as symbols, then please refresh my memory on that. But for those of us running for president, everyone's being baited with this question as if somehow that has anything to do whatsoever with running for president. And my position is it most certainly does not.
Would you ever fly the
flag? Want their president to be focused on the economy, keeping America safe, some really big issues for the nation. I don't think they want us to weigh in on every little issue in all 50 states. That might be an important issue to the people of those states, but it's not on the desk of the president.
Well, let me just ask you this personally. Are you comfortable displaying the Confederate battle flag in public?
I don't personally display it anywhere, so it's not an issue for me, and so that's an issue for the people of South Carolina. Do you display it? I doubt it. Does anyone on your panel display it? I doubt it. For us, it's not an issue.
Well, at least Mike Huckabee went a little bit farther than Rick Santorum was willing to go in terms of what his personal opinion was, and doesn't personally fly the Confederate battle flag. But I want to show a sort of rebuttal to what Mike Huckabee said. This is Cornell William Brooks over on CBS's Face the Nation. He's head of the NAACP, and he, well, I'll talk about it more after you see he pretty well rebuts what Mike Huckabee said there here.
Mr. Brooks, defenders of the flag that flies, the Confederate flags that fly, say that what you've just described is a level of evil that's going to exist whether the flag flies or not.
Well, I would beg to differ. The NAACP has led a boycott of the state of South Carolina for years on end because we are endeavoring to bring that flag down. The fact of the matter is that flag represents exclusion, it represents bigotry, it represents bias. There are white nationalist groups across the country who see that flag representing their values. The fact of the matter is our American flag represents the values of the majority of Americans. That is inclusion, that is democracy, that is the spirit of our founding fathers and our founding mothers. That Confederate flag does not represent those values, and in 2015, it's an anachronistic emblem of a bygone era at best, and most likely and most representative, a set of values that run contradictory, that run counter to who we are as Americans. It has to come down. It must come down.
And when
So that argument obviously is something I find more persuasive. You can let me know what you think down in the comments section, whether what Cornell William Brooks said makes more sense than the dodges from Mike Huckabee and Rick Santorum. I want to show a couple clips on this idea of forgiveness that has come up in several of the other clips. One of the most amazing things, and you saw some citations to this in the more general reports at the beginning, one of the most amazing things I watched was the families of the victims at this bail hearing, where I've never seen victim impact statements come up at a bail hearing before. And here they were talking directly, or I guess through video, to the alleged shooter and saying that they were forgiving him for killing their family members. That was a pretty amazing display. I don't know, it's almost unbelievable. And I want to show a couple clips just talking about this idea of forgiveness. The first one is Chuck Todd actually had on one of the families, and this is the granddaughter of one of the victims with her family talking to Chuck Todd on NBC's Meet the Press. Her name is Alana Simmons, and she talked about why forgiveness is more important than hate to her in this clip.
Reverend Daniel Simmons Sr. was one of the victims of the horrific attack on Wednesday night at Bible study. He not only served parishioners in multiple South Carolina churches, including, of course, at Emmanuel AME, he also served this country during the Vietnam War. His family, who has lost a man described as gentle and humorous, joins us now, including Alana Simmons, who faced the man charged with her grandfather's death in court and told him this: hate won't win. Thank you, Simmons family, for joining us this morning. And of course, I join with the entire country in offering condolences. Thank you. Alana, let me start with you. Hate won't win. Why was it important to you to send that message in court last week?
Well, earlier this week, when all of the families spoke, I was actually inspired by some of the other families who immediately forgave the suspect when they had the opportunity to speak to him. And that made me think of how strong love is. And although my grandfather and the other victims died at the hands of the hatred from this man, the love of the community and the love of Christ and just the love of all of the families and for the victims was so overwhelming that it outweighed the hate that he had for them.
So even if you're not Christian and not religious like I'm not Christian and I'm not religious. There's something inspirational in that, and I've talked sometimes about there being positive things I've seen people get from religion. I've known a lot of liberal Christians, liberal Muslims, liberal Jews, and liberal atheists. That's the point I've tried to make over time about people's religious or lack of religious beliefs, that it doesn't really tell you whether they're going to be good people or not, because there are good and bad atheists and agnostics and Jews, Christians, Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, whatever. I think people often bring certain values, attitudes, cultural background, whatever it is, to their faith, rather than their faith dictating what those values are going to be. And this is something good that people get out of Christianity. And the next clip I'm going to show is Jake Tapper talking on CNN State of the Union to their contributor Van Jones, who was briefly in the Obama administration. And Van Jones explicitly makes this point and mentions Bill Maher, as the anti-religious guy, and says, look, here's a good part of religion, this whole forgiveness thing. Now, I'm not sure that you couldn't get that same message and even inspiration without religion and Christianity and Jesus that Van Jones is going to talk about here. But, I think you could still get it just from, a good ethical, moral philosophy that doesn't involve, faith in a divine being or any kind of faith belief at all. But here's Van Jones making the point that Christian forgiveness shows that there is something good about religion, or some people get good things out of religion anyway, over in this clip.
For being here. Van, I want to start with you because we were talking about this earlier. I think one of the most remarkable events of this last week is the families of the victims telling this horrific person, whose name I will only use sparingly, I forgive you. I don't know that I would have the strength to say that. Is this something that is particular to the AME church? Is this something about black churches? Is it Christianity in general?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think the whole world was moved by that. And I think that we've almost come to take for granted just the great moral strength of the black church in this country. First of all, let's be very, very clear. Both ends of the political spectrum have to be challenged by what you're going to see today. You have the secular left, from Bill Maher all the way over, who've been dumping on religion for the past 5-6 years, saying religion is only about bigotry, it's only about violence, only the fundamentalists are religious. This is religion today. You're about to see the good part of religious faith, the strength that it can give you to get through unspeakable times. And you also have conservatives who, when there's any violence against America, only respond saying we got to go to war. You're not going to hear that today. You're going to hear a conversation about how you deal with the worst of the worst and yet bring out the best of the best. That is the moral strength of the black church. And it's not just the AMEs. I'm a CME. But
CME is have you have a liturgical rivalry with the AME?
Slight rivalry with the AMEs.
Okay.
But I do want to say this. This kind of strength, unfortunately, comes from practice. If somebody comes and picks up a 500-pound box, you say, how can they do that? Practice. Unfortunately, in this part of the country, African Americans have had a lot of practice learning to forgive racial violence targeted against us, and you're going to see that strength on display today.
Doug.
So, like I said, it's an interesting point that Van Jones makes there, although I'm not sure that you couldn't get the same idea that hate really hurts the hater, and it's, forgiveness is a way to lessen your own emotional burden over time. You could get that from psychology, from science, from you don't need Jesus or Christianity necessarily to get that message, although I think that what happened at this church, the way that these parishioners showed Christian forgiveness, that is inspirational. It shows that people can get something good out of religion, even though that's not the only possible source. And on that subject, and really heavy on the Jesus, I'm going to show you a few minutes from the sermon from the Reverend, I think his name is it Norval? Yeah, Norval Goff, who was, Norval Goff. This was part of the 3 hours of CNN State of the Union that kind of delayed me a little bit getting started, in addition to some Father's Day stuff. And he talked both about why they were grateful to law enforcement. And remember, this is the same community that recently had that African American shot in the back running away, Walter Scott, that you saw in an earlier clip. So here's the minister at the Mother Emanuel AME Church this morning, thanking law enforcement and then explaining, why they're forgiving and why there wasn't rioting over in this clip.
And then finally, I want to say thank you to law enforcement. I got no problem in doing that. I want to thank them. I want to thank them. I want to thank, oh yeah, I want to thank law enforcement. I want to thank the chief of police of the city of Charleston and our neighboring communities for working together to bring about a safer place, not just for some of us, but for all of us. Just want to say thank you to the FBI and SLED and all law enforcement, the chaplains. As I get ready to go to my text, I want to thank them because of the respect that they've shown our people, not just black folk, but everybody who resides. Because respect gets respect. A lot of folk expected us to do something strange and to break out in a riot. Well, they just don't know us. They just don't know us because we are a people of faith. And we believe that when we put our forces and our heads together, working for a common good, there is nothing we cannot accomplish together in the name of Jesus. So let's don't get it twisted. We're going to pursue justice. And we're going to be vigilant. And we are going to hold our elected officials and others accountable to do the right thing. The blood of the Mother Emanuel 9 requires us to work until not only justice in this case, but for those who are still living in the margin of life, those who are less fortunate than ourselves, that we stay on the battlefield until there is no more fight to be fought. And for that we say thank you. Now,
well, the important point at the end of that clip that I kept it playing so you would see is that just because the Christian church is preaching forgiveness doesn't mean that they're not seeking justice, and not just justice in this case, but justice for all, I guess, would be the best phrase to use. And I like the way that that clip started off thanking the law enforcement and talking about you get respect by giving respect, and of course the character of the people by not rioting but working through the system and demanding accountability. at least that's a difference with this 21st century shooting compared to like the church bombing or the stuff that went on during the 60s, where all of the establishment is against the perpetrator. Back in the bad old days, there were a lot of the Southern infrastructure didn't want to bring people to justice, or a lot of all-white juries wouldn't convict, and at least that part is gone. But I want to show one more quick clip, or not quite that quick. This is about, actually, it's a few minutes long. It's from NBC's Meet the Press, and it isn't actually specifically related to the Charleston shooting, but they decided to show a different approach to gun violence. Instead of changing laws, it's a way to change people's minds, and it's this excerpt from a TED Talk spin-off, one of those TEDx things. This is from Sing Sing. They had their video producer Dan Slepian go help a group of prisoners who wanted to give advice on how not to end up shooting people with guns, and it was basically what they wanted to tell their 12-year-old self. One of the negatives about this, which is a pretty emotional, affecting piece, is they all seem to be people of color, which was brought up later, not in the clip I'm going to show. But first, here, watch this 3 minutes of convicts in Sing Sing trying to explain to their 12-year-old selves why guns are not a good idea. Here.
Times when we have a conversation about guns, we immediately start debating which laws to pass. But there are other ways to have this conversation, to discuss the culture and the decisions of those who choose to pull the trigger or own a weapon. So this morning we want to take a look at American gun violence from a different perspective, from that of the person pointing the gun. We have a remarkable video to show you. NBC News producer Dan Slepian volunteered to make a video about gun violence on his own time with convicted murderers at Sing Sing. This is the infamous prison just north of New York City. He put these men alone in a room with a camera, and he asked them to do something unique. Talk to their 12-year-old selves. What would they say now that could have made them put down the gun that ended a life and landed them in prison? Here's part of what these men had to say.
My name is Tyrone Abraham. I'm 40 years old. I made a choice, a gun that I held in my hands. A gun, when I first held one, gave me a sense of power. It made me feel strong. It made me feel like I was invincible.
You could be the bad thing that happens to somebody. Think about that, right? There could be a family, there's a child, and a father, and there's a mother, and there's a family. They come here from Africa to build a better life, and they say to themselves, if I'm careful, then I can reach this good thing as long as nothing bad happens. And then I happened to him. You want to be the bad? You want to be the bad?
When I was 17, one of my friends suggested to me, why don't you carry a gun? You need this. So I took up a gun, I held it, and then this gun became my security.
The bullets shot into the crowd were real last night at a premiere of the movie Godfather 3.
I entered a movie theater with a group of friends. Then another group of teens came in, yelling. Pretty soon the argument erupted between my group and that group. One of them pulled out a gun and fired it. I returned fire.
Police rushed in to find 4 innocent victims wounded in the crossfire, 2 of them teenagers, including Tremaine Hall.
I didn't think I was gonna hit anybody, but I did it anyway. A little boy was shot. He died that night.
And it's that fast, and it's over, and it's done, and you don't even know what you did. And by the time you understand, it is too late.
When I think of that, I think of what happened at my trial. His father got on the stand. His father called this kid his buddy. That was his buddy. I took his buddy away from him. Me? How does that sit with me?
Well, that's a pretty sad clip to watch on Father's Day. A father who had his buddy taken away by gun violence. One of the statistics that I heard mentioned on one of the shows this morning that I didn't believe, and then I kind of verified, is that since September 11th in the United States, there have been 400,000 gun deaths in the past 14 years, 13 and a half years. 400,000. Now, the largest number of those are suicides, or the plurality. It's not the majority, but I think the plurality of those are suicides. But still, that is a lot of people killed by guns, and a lot of people, white people, are in prison for killing people with guns too. Not just the people of color that you saw in that NBC clip, which is something that Eugene Robinson and apparently the Twitterverse talked about during the Meet the Press show, and Chuck Todd kind of apologized for that later in the show, although I'm not going to show that clip. That was the last clip I'm going to show on the Charleston church shooting. Like I said, that's 25 clips, about 3/4 of the show, but I do want to show a couple quick clips on the Democratic side of the 2016 presidential election. I know a lot of my viewers are fans of Bernie Sanders, and so I'm going to show a couple clips of Bernie Sanders, who was a guest on HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher, and Bill Maher introduced him, starting off talking about how he's doing a lot better than a lot of people thought he was going to do, and asking him why, and of course getting the obvious answer, it's his message, over in this clip.
Good to see you smile. You know, you're always so serious, which is great because we want a serious guy, but you deserve a smile. You're a rock star now, you know. And you know, you got into this. Everybody said it was just a boutique campaign. You're in New Hampshire, you're within 10 points of Hillary. You're drawing such big crowds, they have to change the venues. You've already got Hillary Clinton talking like Elizabeth Warren. I'm guessing you're going to say it's because you have the right message.
Yeah, actually, we do have the right message. Look, what the campaign is about is a very radical idea. We're going to tell the truth. And the truth is that for 40 years, the middle class of this country has been disappearing, and there has been a huge transfer of trillions of dollars in wealth from working families to the top 0.1%. And what the people of this country are saying, enough is enough. Our government, our country belong to all of us and not just a few billionaires.
Right. All right.
I've shown Senator Bernie Sanders making those same talking points in several previous shows, but I wanted to show Bill Maher pumping him up at the beginning there, and the fact that he's within 10 points of Hillary Clinton in New Hampshire. Of course, he's from the neighboring state of Vermont, but I mean, he is really filling a vacuum in a way that Hillary Clinton has to contend with, even if he isn't necessarily going to take away the nomination. But I suppose stranger things have happened. Not that I can name one off the top of my head, but I talked about the Eugene McCarthy effect back from when he got Robert Kennedy to come in. He showed the weakness of anyway, I don't want to go into all that because the show's already late and going long, but I want to show one more clip of Bernie Sanders, and this is, I thought Bill Maher might actually ask him a tough question. He started off talking about this political cartoon of Bernie Sanders riding a unicorn and asked him about all this free stuff he was promising, and then I thought he was going to ask him, so how are you going to pay for all this free stuff? But instead he sort of ended up backing up Bernie Sanders in the question. But of course, Bill Maher's not really a journalist. No one expects him to be. Here he is helping Bernie Sanders explain where he's going to get all this free stuff from in this clip.
Okay, so I saw this little cartoon on the internet. It was you riding a unicorn. and it says, you know, Bernie Sanders, he wants you to have free college, free health care, free daycare, free, free, free. Obviously this...
So do they.
Yeah, exactly. Obviously, the point of it was, you know, you can't have all this free stuff. And I thought, you know, what about war? Is that free? I read somewhere that that kind of costs a lot.
Well,
so
actually, Bill, our Republican friends who took us into the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, they forgot to pay for those wars. They just put it on the credit card. But to answer your question...
And they want new ones.
Absolutely, in the same way, without paying for it again. But to answer your question, what I do want to see is the United States join the rest of the industrialized world, in fact, in guaranteeing health care to all people as a right. College education is virtually free, which is why I have introduced legislation to make all public colleges and universities in this country tuition free.
Right.
And my point is, we are the wealthiest country in the history of the world. But you know what? It is not American, it is not sustainable when so much of that wealth rests in the hands of a few. So yes, I do want to redistribute that wealth to the middle class and working families and provide them the opportunities which they are entitled to.
And
well, you can see why Bernie Sanders is firing up the Democratic base, the left wing of the Democratic Party, and there are even people outside the Democratic Party, independents and people who aren't, you know, Tea Party Republicans who can really respond to that message, I think. And having shown Bernie Sanders say some really reasonable things, I want to show some of the most unreasonable things I saw on the shows that I normally cover. This is a clip of Ann Coulter, who I normally don't think is worth listening to on much of anything, but she's analyzing the Republican field, which I guess she is popular amongst some weird niche of the Republican Party. I don't know who really takes her seriously, but her analysis is not very serious at all as to who the good Republicans are in the field. This is my first clip of, I think, 6 clips I have on what's going on with the Republican Party this week. Ann Coulter saying why she thinks Donald Trump would be a good pick of the current declared candidates from the HBO Real-Time Overtime. You can watch that in its entirety at a link I put down in the video description. It starts off with Ann Coulter here.
okay, here we are. And which Republican candidate has the best chance of winning the general election?
Of the declared ones, right now, Donald Trump. I especially
Well,
like
what about of all of them? I mean, Scott
fake
Walker?
laughter from the audience.
Scott Walker, would you say?
Of the ones who aren't declared, no, Romney Walker's my ticket.
Romney Walker. See, but last time you said if we nominate Romney, we'll definitely lose.
And I was right, but
Well, why will he win this?
that was 2
Third
years
time's the
in
charm?
advance, and it was because actually it was third time was the charm for Reagan.
Right.
It was because it's very hard to take out an incumbent, and the reason I supported Christie back then, and I don't now, was because he's so flashy and idiosyncratic that we probably were going to lose, but the only shot we had was this wild, idiosyncratic guy. I think Romney would crush Hillary.
I would do anything for
Though
Trump.
if you ran,
Trump.
if you ran Bernie Sanders, it would be much tougher.
Bernie Sanders?
It would be much tougher to beat him than
You
Hillary.
think would be a better candidate than Hillary?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean,
because he would
cares
excite
about
the base.
the American middle
Right.
middle class, working class. Hillary doesn't. She's like the elected Republican. She cares about the Chamber of Commerce.
Well, at least Ann Coulter's a Bernie Sanders fan, but most of that didn't make sense. And I actually want to show Representative Luis Gutierrez, also on the Overtime, talk about how one of these Republicans should take on Donald Trump I don't know if anyone saw his announcement. I watched a large part of it. He talked about Mexicans who came over the border as being, rapists and murderers and maybe some good people or something like that. And I think Luis Gutierrez had a good idea for the way Republicans really could win some Latino votes, although I don't know if any of them will be willing to do it. I don't know, maybe in the debate someone will do what he suggests. Oh, and there's some Coulter in here. Not too much of it over in this clip.
We are not going to deport our way out of this. Mitt Romney, Mitt Romney got more white votes than any other candidate for the presidency of the United States, and he still got his ass whooped by Barack Hussein Obama by 5 million votes. And so my point to you, Bill, is there's this new American coalition. It's young people, it's gay people, it's Latinos, it's Hispanic, it's people who believe in the environment. And so when I saw Jeb Bush actually attempt to broaden the tent of the Republican Party, he had a diverse group of people. He spoke in English and in Spanish fluently, and he was unafraid
no reason why conservatives can't win Hispanic votes.
Yeah, there is.
George W. Bush got
them like there's some sort of
you know what? You're
disease
right.
on the body politic.
That's a problem, isn't it?
That's why they can't.
That does hurt. But George W. Bush got 40%.
Why do Republicans have to be obsessed with winning Democratic constituencies? Why don't we start haranguing still talking? Why don't we start haranguing the Democrats? Why don't you guys try to cut off more of the evangelical vote? Because you are losing with that. That's 40% of America.
Why don't
you get the gun owners?
With one thing that Ann Coulter has to say, I think it is absolutely a bit insulting to say that Hispanics are going to, like lemmings, vote for the Republican Party because your candidate has an O at the end of his name.
Why should they like lemmings?
Why
should they like lemmings vote for the Democratic Party?
Because the policies of the Democratic Party, every poll will show you, most Latinos agree with the policies of the Democratic Party. They're voting their interests. They're voting the policies they agree with.
Marco
Rubio turned against his own bill.
Came here.
Look, if you want Latinos to listen to Republicans, the first sign you have to take off is that I don't like you sign. Because as long as you have you, I get that. But that's not going to win you an election. Because I'm one voter. But there are millions of voters out there. And when Donald Trump, and I find this amazing that the Republican Party did not challenge Donald Trump on what he said. No one in the Republican Party, Donald Trump. It says, so if Jeb Bush challenges Donald Trump, challenges him, and wins and gets through, some miraculously, gets through the Republican primaries, I think then Latinos will say, God, that guy championed our cause. He took on the man that called us rapists and murderers, and he took him on, and you know what? They will reward him because he's opened their hearts.
All right. Let me go on to another subject.
As George Bush did, he'll lose the Hispanic vote 64.
All right.
But you know what?
And by the way,
So, yeah, I think it would be nice to see a Republican take on the anti-immigrant racism of Donald Trump that I saw in his announcement speech. Maybe that'll happen in the debates. It looks like Donald Trump may be in. There's an August debate on Fox News and a September debate, I think, on CNN. Yeah, Fox News and CNN have August and September debates, and maybe Donald Trump will be on the stage and someone will be able to take him on like they said there. But I want to show this interesting clip from NBC's Meet the Press where Chuck Todd pointed out a hypocrisy on the Republican side when it comes to trying to say that their views come from their religious convictions, that a lot of the Republicans were at this evangelical conference trying to convince them that they're really religious. Even Jeb Bush was talking about the Terry Schiavo case where he made this woman stay on life support against the wishes she'd expressed to her husband or whatever, and she lived, made her live in a persistent vegetative state against what should have been the legal outcome. And then Chuck Todd contrasts it with what the Pope said about climate change this week, and I'll talk about that a little more if you see that clip over here.
Republican presidential candidates flocked to Washington this week to make the case to evangelicals that their religious convictions would be at the center of their decision-making if they are elected.
But when you're pro-life,
You need to be pro-life for the whole life.
I would encourage everyone here to be lifting up in prayer the court.
Bring this nation a revival of opportunity for everyone.
And when I was asked to intervene on behalf of a woman who could not speak up for herself, I stood on her side. I stood on the side of Terry Schiavo and her parents.
Many of the messages to evangelicals were familiar. But this week, another religious leader introduced a new topic: climate change. That was a big part of Pope Francis's encyclical, which turned out to be a 184-page indictment of the global economy as a whole. The science of climate change is clear, the Pope said. Humans are at fault, and they're turning the earth into a, quote, immense pile of filth. Well, suddenly, several Republican candidates for president were put in the awkward bind of arguing that religion and religious leaders should stay out of political debates.
I don't go to mass for economic policy or for things in politics. I got enough people helping me along the way with that.
Pope can talk about whatever he wants to talk about. I'm just saying, what should the Pope use as moral authority for?
Republican.
So that was an interesting flip-flop that Chuck Todd emphasized with the way he put that little report together there. And I want to show what they did over on Fox News Sunday, where Chris Wallace had on the Cardinal of Washington, D.C., or I'm not sure if that's his actual area. His name is Donald Wuerl, and he was defending the Pope's encyclical about climate change. And I want to show the clip where he had Chris Wallace had him respond to Rush Limbaugh saying the Pope is what the hell is he trying to do? Or that's one of the funny parts is Chris Wallace says, excuse the salty language, and the only thing Rush Limbaugh says is the word hell. And he's basically saying that the Catholics are telling Catholics to vote for the Democrats because they're backing up this whole climate change thing over in this clip.
Now, while the Pope has bigger things on his mind than American politics, some American conservatives say he is choosing sides. Cardinal, forgive me because this is going to get a little salty.
Essentially, what this papal encyclical is suggesting is that every Catholic should vote for the Democrat Party. Well, no, that's what. How in the hell else do you interpret it when the Pope comes out and sounds like Al Gore on global warming and climate change?
I never thought I'd ask you this. How do you respond to Rush Limbaugh?
Well, this is one of the great blessings of America, isn't it? We're all allowed to speak our mind, even if we don't have all the facts, even if we don't have a clear view of what the other person is saying. We're all allowed to speak our mind, and that's what he's doing. I think what the Pope is doing is something very, very different from that. He's saying, why don't we all discuss this? Why don't we all come to the table? And before we start eliminating other people from the discussion or denouncing them or even ridiculing them, why don't we listen to them and see what they're saying and see where we really ought to be going as a human family?
So that was a good clip from what was an interesting interview. I wish I could show more of it, but I'm kind of running out of time. But what I liked about that clip at the beginning when he responded to Rush Limbaugh in a really soft, subtle way, I don't know, maybe not that subtle, he definitely insulted Rush Limbaugh in the way, you know, a Catholic priest would do it without any negativity. He just said, isn't it wonderful in America how ignorant people who don't know what they're talking about have the right to say what they want? That was kind of the... I think if you watch that clip, that's pretty much how he started his answer about Rush Limbaugh. That's why I chose to give you that clip, and of course it's always fun to show Rush Limbaugh being ignorant. Speaking of people who are kind of ignorant or have shown themselves to be ignorant, the last two clips on the Republican field I want to show is from former Texas Governor Rick Perry, who's in the race. He was over on Fox News Sunday, and the first big question that Chris Wallace asked him about was about his big failure last time around, and why is it going to be any better this time? And I guess first he said he wasn't healthy last time, or we weren't healthy last time. You know, politicians always say we, but it seems most silly when you say we weren't healthy, because who else wasn't healthy besides him? And then, you know, we had to prepare more. And you'll see when Chris Wallace asked him the follow-up question, what did you learn? He goes right back to that answer and then uses the word regurgitation in a way that I don't think really should have used it. over in this clip.
When Rick Perry ran for president in 2012, he shot to the top of the polls. But that ended quickly after a series of gaffes, especially forgetting in a debate one of 3 government agencies he wanted to eliminate. Well, now the former Texas governor is running again and says he's learned from all that. Governor Perry, welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Good to be with you. Thank you.
Let's start with the elephant in the room. I think you'd agree your embarrassing run for president in 2012. What happened?
Well, obviously we weren't healthy. I highly recommend anybody running for the presidency, make sure you're healthy. I'd had major back surgery, and I didn't prepare properly. And I think the real issue there was I thought being governor of the state of Texas for 12 years was enough preparation to run for the presidency. And the fact of the matter is there is nothing like it. Until you've done it, you don't even realize what a challenge it is, these broad array of issues that you have to have more than just passing knowledge of.
What did you learn from it?
Well, I learned, number one, you got to be healthy. And secondly, you got to prepare. And it takes years of preparation, I will suggest to you, whether it's sitting down with real experts on foreign policy, people like Richard Fisher to James Ricards on the monetary side of things, sitting with George Shultz or Henry Kissinger, Brian Hook at the Hay Initiative, individuals who have deep knowledge of what's going on in the world, absorbing it, studying it, and keeping this up for some lengthy period of time. I feel very comfortable now sitting on the stage that I can have those conversations and regurgitate that information that I know and that I've absorbed in a way that the American people are going to see a very different candidate than they did 4 years ago.
Well, I hope he gets a chance to be on the stage so we can see him regurgitate that information to show how much more better prepared he is and how much more healthy we are this time. I don't know, I already talked about that, but then I want to show this real softball question Chris Wallace asked Rick Perry. Last Friday, he said this thing where he referred to the Charleston shooting as an accident. And I hadn't even heard him say that he meant to say incident, but Chris Wallace kind of just presumed that and asked him about it. And then he, just went into his talking points about the importance of his record, it seemed, over in this final clip on the Republican field for tonight here.
Let me talk to you about that, because on Friday you were talking about the shooting in Charleston and you said accident when you meant incident. It was clearly a slip of the tongue, but social media went nuts, which raises the question, which I've thought for some time, don't you have to run almost a perfect campaign? Because if you make any mistake that any other candidate, it would be ignored. People are only going to say, whoops, that's Rick Perry again.
I don't think they're going to ignore anybody, whether it's Hillary Clinton calling a reporter by the wrong name within the last 24 hours or me calling you Mike instead of Chris. I mean, people are going to make mistakes, and people know that. But what people want to see is someone who truly has a vision for this country, who has a record. And I will lay my record out. 14 years of the chief executive of the 12th largest economy in the world, that economic record, my military history, not only of wearing the uniform of this country, but of having been the commander-in-chief of the Texas military forces, the Texas National Guard, my dealing with things like the border, like Ebola, with massive hurricanes. All of that is a record that the people are going to look at. Are they going to say, hey, listen, you said one word when you meant another one? Social media can do what they want to do with that, but when you really get down to it, record is what's going to matter in this election.
One more campaign.
I guess the record's what's going to matter, or that's what his talking points are having him say, but I'm not really persuaded that he's a better candidate or a good candidate, or even that he's, I don't know why he's running, but you can let me know what you think down in the comment section. I have two other quick topics I want to get to. First, one clip on what's going on in Yemen and the war against Al-Qaeda and Islam. I guess we're in a war, and a lot of times when these big stories come, none of the other shows really covered this, but over on CBS's Face the Nation, I guess Clarissa Ward actually got into Sena in Yemen, and here's her report, about 3 minutes on the war in Yemen from CBS's Face the Nation this morning here.
Report earlier.
For 3 long months, a Saudi Arabian-led coalition has been bombing Yemen. The goal? To push out Houthi rebel forces who swept to power last fall and ousted the president, and who the coalition view as a proxy for their arch-rival Iran. We were among the first outside journalists to get inside Yemen to see the effects of the war firsthand. We landed to the news that an airstrike had hit Sana's old city, a 2,500-year-old cultural heritage site known for its distinctive mud brick houses. At least 5 people were killed. At the scene, Abdullah Kakala showed us the remnants of his family home.
They destroy our people for nothing, any reason. We are not belong to Iran or to anybody. We don't like war. We don't like to destroy anybody.
While most of the airstrikes have targeted military installations now under the control of Houthi forces, civilians are paying a high price. An estimated 1,300 have been killed so far. Many more have fled the violence. And it's not hard to see why.
This is the sound of everyday life here in Sana. We can hear outgoing anti-aircraft, jets overhead. They're supposedly bombing over in those mountains over there.
A Saudi-led blockade on the country is compounding the situation. 80% of Yemenis are in need of aid, but vital food, water, and medical supplies can't get in, and people cannot get out. At the Thawra hospital, we met Abdul Mohammed, who is recovering from shrapnel injuries.
From the rockets?
His relative explained that Mohammed needs surgery overseas if his eye is to be saved, but that he can't leave because of the blockade. Many people here blame America for supplying the bombs that Saudi Arabia is dropping. Officially, the U.S. isn't taking sides in this war, though it shares Saudi concern that Iran's influence is growing here. The Houthis denied that they are backed by Iran. But at a rally we attended, it was clear where the group's sympathies lie.
They're chanting the Houthi slogan over and over again, inspired by the Iranian Revolution. Amaut al-America, amaut al-Israel, death to America, death to Israel.
Both America and the Houthis share a key enemy, Al-Qaeda. This week it was announced that their leader here, Nasser al-Waheishi, was killed in a drone strike. But the group is now in a strong position, having used the vacuum created by months of fighting to expand territory and rally recruits. Perhaps the only winners in this war, which is costing the people of Yemen so dearly. For Face the Nation, this is Clarissa Ward reporting from Sana.
So kudos to Clarissa Ward and Face the Nation actually getting a reporter into Sana, Yemen, and giving an update on that story. That, you know, ongoing conflict that didn't really make it into the news for several weeks. That's why I wanted to show you that. And then the last follow-up clip, following up something from last week on political correctness, I want to show this clip from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher. This is this started last week. Jerry Seinfeld had talked about how he made this joke about people using their cell phones with impunity, like a gay French king, and made this gesture, and I talked about how I thought that was a stereotype. You know, the first thing I want to say about this, I didn't really say strongly enough last week, is I'm talking about whether I think something is offensive, whether I would want to watch it, whether I would want to say it, not whether people should be kicked off of campus or not be able to do their shows or not be able to broadcast. In terms of free speech, I think people should have a right to say things that are offensive, and I don't think I have a right not to be offended. But I do have a right to turn the channel if I don't, or say that that's a joke I wouldn't repeat because I think it's offensive. When I say something's offensive and that it uses a stereotype, that's what I mean. Not that it should be banned or taken off of campus or not given free speech. Just whether it's a joke that I personally think is funny or that I would make. And Bill Maher actually defended jokes based on stereotypes and didn't seem to think there was even, he didn't mention the fact that there was a line you couldn't go over, although I think pretty much everyone agrees that jokes based on offensive stereotypes do go too far eventually. But here's Bill Maher defending stereotypes on his New Rule segment. This is pretty much the end of the New Rules in the final clip of the night here.
See, the PC police aren't saying you can't make jokes. You just can't make them about a protected species. Jokes about men, yes. Gay men, no. Kim Kardashian's ass, yes. Her stepfather's tits, no. If someone on the internet expresses the wrong views about gays, women, or Jews, they're subject to endless shaming, unless they're Muslim, in which case all that intolerance is a cultural difference which we just have to tolerate. Because, of course, it's a religion of peace. There's a piece of you there, there's a piece of you there. And now let me explain why that joke is perfectly okay. Because everyone gets made fun of for something, and it's never 100% fair. If I make and the French surrendered joke, everyone laughs. Even though the French haven't surrendered in every war. In fact, mostly in just the one. But it was kind of an important one, so they have to own it. If I make a supermodel threw up her food joke, everyone laughs. And certainly not all supermodels are bulimics. But more than plumbers. If I make a joke about how all Asians are bad drivers, well, that one's true. No. It's not, but a little bit, so we laugh. As we should when someone makes a Muslims blow shit up joke, which they have to own because they do it more than anybody else, with the possible exception of the U.S. military. All right.
Well, he kind of saved himself with the U.S. military part, but I don't think that necessarily that jokes based on offensive stereotypes that are used to oppress minorities and ethnic groups and races or whatever groups you're talking about, there's definitely a line. It's hard to say exactly where that is, but there's an edge, edgy insult humor. It's an edge that's very difficult, I think, to maneuver, and very few comics do it that well. And I don't think there's anything wrong with analyzing jokes afterwards and finding the stereotypes that we really shouldn't be finding funny or necessarily perpetuating in our society as some kind of joke when they're not really a joke. Or that's my opinion. That's the show. I'm way out of time. I got to go have my dinner for the final parts of Father's Day. Like I said, happy Father's Day to those of you out there. Thanks to my patrons who have contributed. You may have noticed I only have advertisements every half hour in the show because I'm rounding up, getting close to the $300 a month for my patrons. You can add to that by clicking on the little eye with your mouse there. Either direct donations or patron donations will help me decrease the ads even further and keep my videos going through 2016. Maybe I'll make another edited Proust video this week like I did last week. It was based on breaking news. If not, I'll see you 6:30 p.m. next Sunday. And every Sunday for my clips that I pick out, most interesting clips from the corporate media. Hope you enjoyed the clips I picked out this week. And I'll see you next week. And until then, I'll be seeing you all around the internet.